This episode is brought to you by ProForce Athletics, the home of unique and custom sports tees serving athletes, teams, organizations, and fundraising campaigns. To learn more, visit ProForceAthletics.com. Welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, heroes and villains. I'm your host, Dushawn Fauntleroy. I know your time is precious, so we're going to get right into today's show. In today's show, I have a very special guest coming on. His name is James Leath from IMG Academy. And in today's show, we're going to be discussing talent versus character, leadership development, how to build confidence, and James's number one strategy to overcome fear that he uses with his athletes. So without further ado, I want to bring on James Leath to the Sports Mastery Podcast. Coach Leath, could you explain to everybody your position and role at IMG Academy?
Hey, Deshaun, and that was a fantastic intro. Thank you very much. At IMG Academy, I'm the head of leadership development, and that's housed within our athletic and personal development department. Basically, what I get to do is talk to the athletes about character development, leadership development, things that don't necessarily pertain to them on the field as athletes, but they quickly find out if they learn how to lead, if they learn to be true to themselves, that actually makes them a better athlete, a better teammate, and they are just more successful. And so I get to partner with a couple of different departments. We have nutrition. We've got mental conditioning coaches who focus a lot on the sports psychology stuff, and our strength and conditioning coaches. And all of us as a team work on the athletes and basically get them to a very heightened state of awareness when it comes to the mental side of the game.
What sports groups do you work with down there at IMG?
Lucky for me, I get to work with all of them. So football, basketball, baseball, tennis, soccer, golf, track and field, lacrosse. I get to work with every single team, and we have it worked out. So it seems like a lot, but somehow we get it done where we get to work with all those teams on leadership, character development, and mental conditioning type stuff. And we find that the ages change kind of what the curriculum is. You can get a little bit more deep when you talk to juniors and seniors and postgrads than when you're talking with freshmen and sophomores in high school, where that's more of just like an experiential type stuff.
You know, I knew you were working at least with football and basketball because we've tried to schedule this interview about three times. I know that, and I know things have come up for you down there, you know, in terms of your schedule adjusting. But, you know, fortunately for me, I'm patient. I know you're a busy man. I had a chance to interview Duncan Simpson, one of your colleagues down there. Discuss with my athletes is talent is one thing, but you have to carry yourself appropriately off of the field, and you have to know how to handle yourself in the classroom and be an outstanding person in your community. So I want to get into a conversation of, you know, let's discuss that blog post, talent versus character, for our parents out there, for the coaches out there, and for our student athletes. If you can define the difference for us.
One of the most difficult transitions, part of transitioning to IMG Academy for our athletes, is they came from a town or even a county where they were the best athlete there, guys and girls, and everybody knew who they were. And they come to IMG, and they're surrounded by people who were the best athletes in their city. And now all of a sudden they have to adjust, and now they're not getting all the attention. And you know, any athlete that's at IMG is going to get a ton of attention, but it's not like back home. And it kind of opens up their eyes. It's one of the reasons why our athletes are so valuable to college coaches in their perspective, because they've gone through that transition of, oh, now everybody's good. Now I've got to step up my game. And so one of the problems with being one of the best athletes in your town is you might not have to work so hard because you're so good. And maybe you don't realize that talent in the next town is just as good. And in the next town over, that guy's even better than you. In the next city, she's better than you. And so talent is abundant. It's in every town. There's so many spots. There are so many spots available in college, and even less in the professional sports. And so in that article, I write about these different conversations that I have with recruiters. And we get a lot coming through IMG Academy. And even before I was at the academy, I worked a lot with recruiters. One of the things that these recruiters always say, there's always reoccurring themes. One of them is, you know, what is that athlete doing when they think nobody's watching? And it's talent is getting to the line before everybody else. But character is actually touching the line. And there's a very big difference between those. I had a conversation with one of my old athletes, and he asked me that question. He goes, what's the difference between winning and losing? And I asked him, I was like, you're in practice and you see that guy who's coming in first on all the sprints and he gets all the way to the line, but he doesn't actually touch the line. That's a loss. That's not a win. He didn't win. And the fact that he thinks that that's okay, that's a lack of character. And when he gets to the higher levels, that's where he's not even going to know. Oh man, why am I not being looked at? He won't even know that it's because the coach saw him cheat, because the coach also has all these other people that they're looking at. And so that little chink in their armor, that little lack of character, they may not even know that that's the reason that they didn't get that shot.
You know what? I was just talking to one of my friends, actually my business partner, and his daughter. She's in the 6th grade, already a straight A student, and she gets done with a lot of her work right away. And it's easy to her. It's easy to her right now. It's easy for her. And then she also laughs and jokes and with other kids. And I was just explaining to her the other day, this is a time where you can start now. If you finish an assignment early in class, you can start helping others that need help, in terms of your leadership development. So we're starting to talk to her about leadership now as a 6th grader, because she's very intelligent already at a private school in terms of as a middle school, student athlete, and she happens to play volleyball. So you're right on 100%, man. With my older athletes, especially football athletes, I work with a lot of football and track and field athletes, and you get stigmatized being athletes, whether you're in high school, definitely in college. And I always encourage my kids to sit up front in class, make it to class every day, and learn how to build a rapport with your instructor. Raise your hand at least once, per class, even if you know the answer, and try to meet with your instructor a couple of times throughout the term.
Yeah, something I've learned, and when you're talking to those guys, and I've told football players like that, and I remember my coach telling me that. But if you remember when our coaches told us that, we're like, Coach, I don't want to sit in the front row. They don't
right.
But what I've found is that it actually helps if you go, look, I need you to sit in the front row. Why? Because there's less distractions up there. Because you forget that there's
Correct.
people behind you. And now you can just focus. And we've become such a distraction-filled society with our phones and with everything that's always trying to get at us. And that's why you sit up in the front. And so sometimes you just have to kind of break it down in other terms. Not like you need to be a leader, be up front. It's like, no, you know what? You need to be up there because you see a squirrel and I lose you for an hour. And so I need you to sit up there and be focused.
Yes. And one of the things I learned my last couple of years in college, sitting up front, you can't afford to nod off. You can't afford to get distracted. You can't fall asleep in class because everybody's going to see you and you're right in the instructor's face. So it puts a certain amount of anxiety and stress and pressure on you to basically succeed. And you keep your attention span right there in the class, and for me, I did better on exams. And I know if I was struggling in between a B and a C or A and a B, I always got the higher grade, so there is a psychological and social dynamic that goes along with that in terms of building rapport and demonstrating that you're willing, to sit up front and show that you're not only brawn, but you're also brains.
I love that. Yeah. And if you're sitting up front, the teacher notices you. And then when you go to office hours, they remember that because they also remember you in class. But also, if you're a football player or a basketball player, you're probably a larger person, or even an athlete. You have this kind of maybe swagger. I don't know, but you get noticed, and those teachers notice that too.
Yes.
And so if you show effort, a lot of times effort. And I was a college professor. The guys and girls that showed effort, I happened to maybe I was a little more lenient on things when they kind of fought me on a grade. If they showed up to class, I was able to have maybe a negotiation or a talk with them and listen to them. But if I just never know who they are and then they're just like, oh, I got to see that stupid. Well, who are you? I've never even seen you before.
Right. I like that because you've had the opportunity. You can look at that dynamic from both sides. That I think that's awesome. One of the books that I've been reading for the last couple of months, and this gentleman, I'm getting into his material a lot, and I've already incorporated with a few of my athletes, is John Maxwell's work, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And I know that's one of your big components down there is leadership development. So what are some of your strategies strategies. You get a kid that comes to IMG, they've been the best in their town, everybody looks up to them, and now they're in a different role and they're pretty much starting from the bottom per se. And, we have to start showing this athlete how to become a leader, because, I remember when I was younger, coaches would say, you have to be a leader, but nobody ever shared systems and strategies with me for that. So what are some of the things that you teach or share with your athletes, James?
That is John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. It's basically my leadership Bible.
Right.
Exactly. I'll be talking to somebody. I'll be like, "Oh yeah, the Law of E.F. Hutton," and they're like, "What?" I'm like, "No, never mind. Sorry, you don't know that book." Or the Law of the Lid. And there's all these things that, because the book's old, people don't want to read it. They want to read the most recent things. And I'll go. You're probably like me, where I cannot walk by a used bookstore without going in. Like, I'm gonna go in. I'm gonna smell the books. I'm gonna buy some book written in 1920 and spend weeks in it. Because those principles don't change. Just the distractions. That's really what changes. So at leadership development, I think even when they come to IMG, they come from other high schools, and leadership development, it often gets overlooked at the high school level, and then even really at the college level if you don't have it kind of as part of the experience. And I think it's 3 reasons. Number one, it's time, right? High school coaches, they're often short on resources and really low on coaches. I coached at a high school in San Luis Obispo, California, and the only coach that was on staff at the school was the head coach. You got freshman, JV, and varsity, and one coach works at the school. And so that's difficult. Leadership, and when you're teaching it and when you're trying to facilitate growing activities, it's hard when you've got to run the team, you've got to do all this other stuff. And leadership, really, it's not about the number of books you've read. It's about being an open book. It's about opening up your life and being like, hey, here's some mistakes that I made. Here's the consequences of those mistakes. Here's something that maybe you can learn from. And most coaches, they just don't have the time in their schedule to kind of share those kind of experiences in a meaningful way, because it doesn't happen overnight. It requires numerous occasions to reveal like the character of an athlete. And then once that character is revealed, any sort of suffering or extreme condition for fear of their feelings getting hurt, we have to be careful not to be scared to hurt their feelings. But I mean, that's kind of one of the things that we have. It goes into number 2, which is parents, right? So like, if adversity is absent, leadership is silent. And parents often won't let their child experience any kind of bad stuff. Like you can't let my kid suffer, because that's, I don't want them to be sad. And you have parents that are stopping coaches. And I'm not talking about like yelling and bullying, right? Like, I'm talking about like letting an athlete struggle a bit instead of giving them the answer. I wrote an article called The Zipper Phenomena, where I watched this woman sit there with her son, and he was struggling with his zipper. And he's like, "Mom, I can't do it." And I'm looking at her and I'm looking at him, and I'm just like, Lord Jesus, don't let her do it for him. Please let him do it. And I'm sitting there and I'm just praying that she goes, "Yeah, you can." He's like, "No, I can't." She's like, "Honey, I've seen you do it. I know you can do it." And then he goes at it and he's struggling. All of a sudden you hear zip, and he looks up and he's like, "Mom, I did it." Like, that moment right there, that's teaching adversity. That's teaching the ability to be resilient and have grit. And it's just a little tiny thing. Or like the other day, this little girl was like, "Can you give me some water?" I was like, "No, you can get it. It's over there." But I realized, "Oh, you don't know how to do it." And she says, "No." And I said, "Well, come on, I'll show you." So I took the cup and I put it underneath the water, and I put the water in there, and I go, "Did you see that?" She goes, "Yeah." I go, "Do you think you can do it?" She goes, "Yeah." So I pour the water out and I give her the cup. Guess who knows how to get their own water now, right? Like, that's teaching leadership right there. And then the third is, we forget that these kids are not mini adults. They're not just little tiny adults running around with all these life experiences. They don't have the experience of adult, and they have no idea what the coach is talking about. Like when you said, show more leadership, or we need leadership. Like, what the heck does that mean to an 8th grader? They have no idea. Like, what do you mean leadership? Like, you want me to start making rules? Like, I don't even understand that, right? And so we ask our athletes to be better leaders, but We don't teach them what that looks like. So to your question, how do we teach leadership? I think leadership is caught. It's not taught. In my classes, what we do is we talk different ways to lead. We discuss things like the primary traits of leadership. You've got trust, integrity, credibility. And then you have secondary traits, things like talent, previous sport experience. I mean, even things like height and likability. These are secondary traits that they help, but they're not absolutely necessary. And you also, what I love to do is teach the kids different types of leaders. So you've got the performance leader. You've got like the Usain Bolt, who's he's going to win. It's all about the numbers. It's all about just going out and just they're going to deliver with you. And have you ever read, what is it? It's a recent book, The Captain's something, where it talks about how like the best athletes on your team, you shouldn't make them the best leaders on your team. No, I'm sorry. The best athletes on your team, you shouldn't make them a captain. Oh, dang it.
I haven't read that. Is that a book?
It is. Yeah. It's, I can't remember it, but basically what they were saying is that the better the athlete, the less you should make them a captain, because you just need to let them be a good athlete. But, so you've got that performance leader and they're all about competition. Then you have the locker room leader. And that locker room leader is all about setting the culture. And they may not be your starters, but they could be. They're just kind of your role players. And if you remember, I always use that term or that video from Remember the Titans, where they finally have that moment where segregation is kind of broken down and they're singing, "Ain't no mountain high enough," right? And then there's one guy in there, Bud, who people forget that Ryan Gosling was in that movie. And he's sitting there with Bud, and Bud's like pissed off because, the black guys are in there. And that was that time, and he's like, "Come on, let's have some fun." He's like, no. And like, so Ryan Gosling is one of those guys. And then you remember the big dude comes in. He's like, "Oh, what's wrong?" He's like, "No, I just gave your mama a piggyback and she's twice the size as me," or something like that. Right. But that's like, you need those kind of locker room culture leaders, the ones that set the tone for the way the team goes. And then you have social leaders, and these guys are all about relationships, and girls too, like, chemistry captains is what I like to call them. You've got two left, right?
I like that.
Yeah, and you need those. They're like the glue, right? You got organizational leaders. These are the ones that they go and they do like FCA and 4-H and all these other clubs outside. And they're the ones that, like, one of my best friends, he lives in Dallas, his name's John, and he played college football. And now the guys that he played college football with who went to the NFL are now like trying to get a hold of him through LinkedIn and try to get him to help him out, because he was an organizational leader. He had the networks. He was that guy that was like, "Hey, when you're done with football, call me." And we need those kind of people on our teams. It also helps with burnout, because if you have somebody that's taking you away from the sport a little bit, you come back to the sport and you're like excited about stuff. And then the last one is the future leaders. It's the people who are going to step up if somebody goes down or the next year. And so these are the people that they're going to carry on the legacy. And so with those 5 leaders, you have somebody on that team that's like, "I can do that. I can be that." But then I also teach them every year it changes. You might be the best player on the team this year,
yes,
but then you go to IMG and you're a backup. So how are you going to lead and still add value to the team? And that's the most important lesson, is when you're like, "Oh, I got to get mine." It's like, no. You got to give yours to the team. And if you can do that, you will actually get more back if you are leading. And so if I put this on Twitter the other day and it got a lot of traction, it was, if you're above serving, then leading is absent or something like that. Dang it. I totally messed that one up.
Yes. I mean, I think we get it though.
So anyway, that leadership, if serving is below you, then leading just really is beyond you. And you just won't ever be able to lead, because if you don't serve, then you can't lead.
I'm working with a football athlete. He's a sophomore and he has some seniors in front of him. So he's a linebacker. So he gets rotated from middle linebacker to outside linebacker. He plays some DN. They've even put him down at nose guard. And this dude is like 6 foot, 200 pounds. So he's undersized when it comes to being on the D line, but he's working his butt off. He knows he'll be a stand-up player come next year, and he won't have to play any parts of the D line. But due to his effort, they have to have him on the field because he just wreaks havoc. And he's still learning the game from a positional standpoint in terms of linebacker. And we've been discussing leadership. And this guy, he's a sophomore. I've been working with him since the middle of his 7th grade year. So he's getting a lot of these systems and strategies right now that you're talking about. So the last time we spoke, I was explaining to him, I want to say it's the law of explosive growth. I just browsed through that chapter, read it really fast, and he's doing really well. I'm like, now you have to start raising up some of your other athletes up that are sophomores, that are juniors, that are freshmen, that are going to be on the team next year. Everybody recognizes you as a leader because you kill it in the weight room. You're always in practice and your grades are right on par. He's a sophomore, so he's on track. He's taking pre-calculus as a sophomore. So he is on his way. So everything is academics right now as far as clearing that in, getting through the NCAA clearinghouse. So I really appreciate everything that you're discussing in terms of leadership development, man. And I'm looking at the 21 irrefutable laws right now. And, that first chapter is the law of the lid. So the gentleman that introduced it to me, us as coaches, or, sometimes we have these titles. Just because you have a title doesn't make you a leader. And I felt that was profound, the way he explained that to me. So it's really making me look at myself as in a different way in terms of a leader, and helping other people and serving other people, as you discussed before. How to build confidence. You get these athletes that come from, potentially all over the world, James, and now they're with some of the best athletes in the world. They're just starting from the bottom again. How do you build that confidence up when you see somebody that was outstanding in their community or state? They come down to IMG Academy, and now, they're not playing the same as they were, or you see the chink in the armor now.
Sometimes I think it's because they're confused and they're trying to figure out, how do I become significant? So maybe if I suck, then I'll be different than everybody else and people will pay attention to me. And it's a weird thing because they don't realize they're doing it. But when you call them out on it, it's like, I think, like, one time I told this one of our girl soccer players, like, I think you're sucking on purpose. Like, I think that you're not doing well because you want attention. She's like, no, there's no way I'm doing that. And I was like, well, I watched you at the soccer field and you did this, this, and this. She's like, yeah, I'm better than that. And so she all of a sudden kind of realized, like, okay, so why are you doing that? And so then it was, because everybody's so good and, I'm just kind of another person out there. I was like, well, why don't you let that motivate you to be better? Now you can do that crazy pass that you used to do at your last school where that girl would never be able to get it, but this one's going to get it.
One of the things I can appreciate about building confidence is sometimes you just have to do that thing over and over, fail, learn from your failure, or make mistakes, learn from those mistakes. I experienced that with Olympic lifting. I experienced that teaching Olympic lifting. I've even experienced it podcasting. Every podcast, I learn something new. But as I do it over and over, if you listen to episode 1, I want to say when this releases, it'll be maybe episode 61 or 62. But I've gotten a little bit better since episode 1, to 62. But, sometimes building confidence is just doing that thing over and over and facing it and not being afraid to do that. And then, slowly but surely that confidence rises and you say, you know what, I can do this. I'm better than that.
Right. Like you take some
Yes,
L's
you
and
have
you're like,
to.
all right, I lost that one. I'm just going to chalk it up to the lost column and let's do it again. Let's go. So I think I always teach that confidence is fluid and that it's never constantly at one level. And, things can come and happen to us and knock us off of our game, but we can always go back to some of the stuff that we've done, and you talked a little bit about fear. And I think fear, it comes from focusing on what's going to happen to you. And instead you have courage, and that comes from focusing on what you're going to do about it. And that preparation, you can go back and be like, oh, I've prepared for this. I'm ready for this. And so when it comes to fear, I think the two things that you need is one, preparation, and the other is intentional self-talk. Like you need to remind yourself or put up something or have somebody tell you like, hey, you trained for this. You did this. I had a conversation with an athlete yesterday who he's a junior in college and he didn't play football in high school, played 2 years of college basketball, and then decided, I want to play football. So he was picked up by another school. Yes. He's now at that school. He blew a coverage 2 weeks ago, and the coaches took him out and didn't put him back in until the next game in the second half. And he was like, so I don't know if this is working out. I don't know if I'm going to make it. I said, bro, you've already made it. First of all, like, you're playing college football. Like, there's right. Not too many people move on from this. And so you need to think about, like, you've already made it. I go, number two, you're a junior. And everybody on the team has twice as much football experience than you. And yet you're still getting in the game. So you're focusing on the wrong thing. The game is a very short period, but practice is, that's where you're going to get better. Plus, it's not your year to shine. And so make your mistakes now. Next year, don't make these stupid coverage mistakes. You shouldn't make a coverage mistake as a senior anyways. And so I told him that, and I said, you know what? At the end of the day, you worked to be here. Like, you deserve to be here, and you have to remind yourself of all the work that you put in spring ball and during summer and during fall. And so the thing I told him to do, and I hope he did it today because I'm going to text him after practice, but I told him, when you get to practice, you stop right there at the beginning of the practice field and you have your helmet in your hand. I want you to take a deep breath. I want you to look around. I want you to be grateful that you get to play football for the next 2.5 hours. And then I want you to take a good look, put the helmet on, and then I may have used a couple explicatives to get them pumped up. But, you know, right. Sometimes that verbal communication, you use a curse word, it kind of pumps them up, and because it shocks them. And he was just like, Coach, yeah, that's what I needed. All right, I'll talk to you later. You know, and that's exactly what he needed. And so we forget, because we're in the grind, that when you just grind and grind and grind, when you get to the end, you kind of miss everything. Like, I hung out with some Olympians a couple weeks ago, and they've podiumed multiple times, and they tell me, you know what the most depressing day of my life was? The day after I won my medal. I'm like, what are you talking about? They go, yeah, that meant the journey was over, and I didn't enjoy it. It's like, wow, there's a lesson right there. Didn't enjoy the journey. Yeah. So you go to a bowl game and you win it, and it's over, and it's your senior year, and you're like, all right, man, I didn't even get invited to the combine. I guess life is over. It's like, no, you missed it. It's not over.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to James Leath, head of leadership development at IMG Academy. Today, we're discussing talent versus character, leadership development, how to build confidence, and his strategies to overcome fear. James, was there anything else that you wanted to cover or share with the Sports Mastery audience in terms of everything that we've discussed thus far?
I think kind of at the beginning, we were talking about talent and character. Something really super important that you and I didn't have to worry about growing up is that social media. Is that are you one thing in person and another thing online? Because that social media, what it's become is the megaphone to your character. And whether you agree or not, you're going to be judged by what you post. And so I'm always teaching athletes, look, pause before you post. And if you can't pause before you post, then delete the app. Because when you leave social media, nobody's going to care. You know, but the thing is it can hurt you more than it can help you, social media. And so, because it's a distraction. So I think that's one of the big things about, they don't realize that if I'm a bully online, people won't know because I'm hidden behind the keyboard. But there's ways to find out. And there's a lot of catfishing going on with coaches. I do it with my athletes, and they have no idea.
Ladies and gentlemen, student athletes, if you're listening to this, you better pause before you post, you know, because we've seen people cost themselves $150,000, $200,000 scholarships because they posted something that was inappropriate, and it basically destroyed their credibility, and it showed aspects of their character that wasn't worked on, wasn't developed, and now they're paying a price for that. So if you're a coach listening to this, please share this episode with your athletes. Parents, please share this episode with your athletes. Student athletes, if you're listening to this, play this over again.